Hi, everyone. Shuffle some things around. So I see that we are recording. I think I've not been the greatest about trimming the beginnings of these meetings. I may change the settings so that it doesn't auto record until somebody presses the button. So having said all of that, if you're here, you are at the weekly 114 release team meeting. This is week 3. Today is January the 21st. And you are being recorded and will be posted to a publicly available YouTube later. So please keep in mind that we have a code of conduct here in the Kubernetes community, which boils down to don't be a jerk. Hi, everybody. It's Monday. It's a holiday in the US, but some of us are still here. If you are here, if you would be so kind as to put your name in the meeting notes under the attendees section, then we'll know you were here. I guess I'll go ahead and put myself down as the host for this, and I will roll into my update for the week. And I'm super excited to hear updates from everybody else. I have a link to the contact spreadsheet where I have contact info for all of the different roles for the 114 release. What I would like to see is contact info for your shadows as you choose your shadows from the outcomes of last week's survey. I've had a couple people ping me about what's a reasonable number of shadows. And so I'll just say up front that my stance on this is your shadows are your responsibility. I'm not going to tell you how to do your job with your shadows. I will share with you what I have chosen to do with my shadows, although I'm a little bit of a special case because the criteria for being a release lead shadow is basically the same criteria for being a release lead. So I know that my shadows have already been through the release process, and I know they already understand what time commitments they have to bring to the table. But I basically have chosen 1 to 2 shadows because I am a very busy person. Life gets in the way. I may not be able to show up to each and every one of these meetings, and I want to trust them well enough to be able to pretend to be me if I'm not around. So that means I expect these 1 to 2 people to show up to this meeting to get some context and color, or watch recordings if they can't show up, just to understand, generally speaking, how things proceed. I expect them to be reviewing any changes I make to the playbook as I go along. I would love it if they made changes to the playbook ahead of time because they're reading it and being like, hey, I didn't realize this was a thing that I was expected to do. I will probably lean on them a lot more later on in the release cycle. I've had a couple people say they have like a volunteer army of shadows, which is awesome, but I view that less as a mentor-mentee relationship or an understudy relationship. I view that more as a group of people who are eager to help out. And we love those people here at sig-release. I personally have been involved in every release since 1.4, whether or not I had a lead or a shadow or whatever next to my name. And this group of people shows up week after week. So we do kind of notice who shows up, and we also notice who does the work. And we are very, very appreciative of it. So you don't necessarily have to have some title next to your name if you want to help out, because we welcome any and all help. It's less of a status thing. It's more of a commitment thing. So that's just how I'm approaching things with my shadows, but I'm open to how you want to do things with your shadows. So that said, any questions on the shadows front? Okay, I think what would be helpful as we roll through each person's updates is just a little brief update on where you are with your shadow selections. Some other administrivia I have to do. I apologize, mea culpa. Project management does not come to me super naturally, so I think I've fallen down on some two key components. One would be a 114 release calendar that y'all can subscribe to that has things like the milestones as dates and has the appropriate meetings in place. And I also haven't been sending out weekly email updates that has all of what I'm saying out loud in written form. I tend to operate better by speaking, so I speak here and I speak in the community meeting and I link to these things, but some people just want the TLDR. So I'll be working to get better at that. What I have been doing over the past week is helping Claire go to all of the individual SIGs and try and start to do the scatter gather of figure out what the plan is from those SIGs for 114 and try to share with them our hopes and dreams around the use of KEPs for everything. So there is a template update to the KEP. I would appreciate eyes on that to see if that has, roughly speaking, the right content. I am taking KEPs as a sub-project and handing that over to SIG PM because I feel like product, project, and program managers, pick your P, all three of them should be showing up to SIG PM, and they probably have ideas and experience on how to best make that process work for everybody. This is a little bit of a change where like SIG architecture has a lot of opinions on the content of the KEPs, and I would like them to be involved in the review, but they can get a little bike sheddy when it comes to process. So there's that. And then the next upcoming milestone that I am aware of is enhancements freeze, which is at the end of January. If we have time at the end of this, I also volunteered that we could finish the rest of the 113 release retro because we did not get to it during last week's sig-release meeting. Any questions? Okay, cool. Let's see. Claire, are you around? You are.
Yes. So my update, as Aaron said, between myself, him, and his shadows, we went to a bunch of SIGs last week and kind of gave them updates on wanting KEPs for everything and checked in on what enhancements were slated. In addition to that, I went through and pinged all of the open issues in Kubernetes enhancements that had not gone stale without stating intent of doing something in 114. And based on feedback from those of plans, it looks like we have 36 enhancements roughly slated for 114 at this time. Of those, 19 I've been able to find KEPs, and I'm trying to track down the remaining ones. And then we have, of those, about 11 are looking to be alpha, 14 graduating to beta, and 9 graduating to stable. And then update on my shadows, I've selected them and reached out, and I'm waiting for one last one to confirm their availability. And that's my update for the day. Are there any questions?
One other bit of administrivia that comes to mind, when you have chosen your shadows, if you could make that selection by opening a PR to the release team file. That way we can sort of have written down like who they are and what their handles are. So I'll drop a link to that in chat. Cool. All right. Thank you very much, Claire. Moving on, Maria, would you like to fill us in on CI Signal?
Yes, absolutely. So CI Signal has not many news since last week, which could be a positive, but there are two failing jobs in master blocking, one for SIG storage and one for SIG scalability. The second one, SIG scalability, is already on top of. I'll just work with SIG storage over the next couple of days to see if they can start work on the first one. Master upgrade is looking quite worrying. By worrying, I mean pretty much red across the board. But the good, in quotes, news is that it seems that it's the same root cause for most of the failures, and there's an open issue for them. In terms of shadows, it was quite nice to see so many people interested in CI Signal. I've gone through the candidates this morning and have picked them, and I'm now in the middle of reaching out to confirm that they're still available and interested, and hope to PR in names sort of in the next couple of days.
Awesome. Not super surprised that upgrade tests are failing now. I will try to work with you to see if we can ping the right folks about that probably tomorrow.
Sounds good, thanks.
I don't suppose we have Nico or any of the bug triage shadows around today. Okay, moving on. Amit, what do you have to tell us about test infra this week?
Hey, so I also finalized on my shadows. There were about more than 60 plus responses for that, and I finalized on 3 of them, and all 3 of them confirmed it. And I also went ahead and PR'd to the release team. So that's finalized now. And then the number of PRs merged in KK this week were about 84. And while gathering this information, I also happened to notice that Velodrome is pretty slowed down now. So I might try to look into Velodrome this week. And that's about all from this info.
Okay, cool. And thank you for the PR for your shadows. Actually, so I think I see some of your shadows on here. Do you folks want to introduce yourselves?
Hey, I'm Tara. I'm gonna be one of the test infra shadows.
Awesome, Tara. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you too.
Yeah, hey, I'm James. I'm also shadowing test infra, the test infra role. So looking forward to working with everyone.
Hi, James. Howdy, stranger. Okay, cool. Glad to have you on board. So next up, I think we have docs to talk about. Is Jim around here? Okay. Anybody shadowing docs here? Cool. Well, just to read out for Jim, since he's kind enough to update. So he does have his shadow selected. He informed them via Slack. And we're gonna, let's see. He's also gonna send out notice to anybody who did not get selected, who had docs as one of their preferences. And we'll start checking out where we are with docs PRs in general as we get there in the schedule. Next up, do I have Dave here or anybody who is a release note shadow?
Yeah, this is Dave.
Hey, Dave.
Yeah, so we have shadows selected and confirmed. So I'll do a PR to the release team file today. I'll also be submitting the PR for the initial draft of the release notes today. And some things that our team will be working on is automating some of the verbiage through the release note tools. There was one other outstanding item I had for out of tree release notes. I know this was a big topic of conversation. This might not be the right forum to discuss right now, but was wondering where we kind of landed on that and what should be included, what should be out.
That's a really great question. In reviewing the 113 retrospective, maybe we can hash more of that out as we get there. But I know I have an action item to like distill my rant about it. The rant roughly being like, if it doesn't have anything to do with code in Kubernetes/Kubernetes, why is it in a file called changelog in Kubernetes/Kubernetes?
Yeah, makes sense.
So we can probably figure out how to like roll-in changes from associated sub-projects, but we'll get there when we get there.
Okay, sounds good. And also, one of the shadows for release note is on Jeffrey. So if you want to introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Jeff. Some of you know me, some of you don't. So hi. And I think one of the other ones is on too, Dave.
Who else is on? I was looking through the attendees. I think that was all.
Okay, cool. Happy to have you aboard, Jeff, and other shadows TBD.
And actually, sorry, Lindsay is on.
Lindsay, would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm on the bus right now. I'm not sure if anybody can hear me, but hi.
Hi, Lindsay. Welcome from the bus, or welcome to the bus.
Thanks. Yeah, I was part of the 112 release team, so I was looking forward to being on the 114 release team.
Very cool. Thank you, and thank you for going back on mute because of the background noise. Okay, we're gonna skip the comms update this week because Natasha and Caitlin are not around. I believe they have a comm schedule that's being drafted, and we'll see where we are with that later this week. Next, we're going to move on to Hannes to talk about release branch management and his experience in cutting release.
Yeah, hello everybody. As you can see in the metrics section, we cut the alpha 1 last week or someone. And no big issues there, but still 2 smaller issues. One of the things is that the tooling does silently ignore when there are essential tools missing. I created an issue for that and tried to fix that. And the second issue was a discussion about how and when to cut Debian packages and RPMs. So for this alpha, we did not create any packages, but one of the things I want to do is follow up on that and talk to the various people who have opinions about how to create packages and how to publish them, and so on and so forth. The first step I'm working on is a cap on how to create the packages. Hope to be PR'd soon. And the other one is there is a scheduled call with a couple of people who are interested in that and more so in how to publish packages. That's gonna happen this Wednesday. So if you're interested in any of those topics regarding packages, get in contact with me.
Could you do me a favor and invite the sig-release, Kubernetes-sig-release at googlegroups.com address to this? The reason I'm asking about this, and one of the sig-release chairs is on here, so he can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm trying to get us in the practice of if there's a sig-release related sub-project that's got its meeting going on, it should invite the SIG that it's a sub-project of. And I say this because I was trying to push sig-release to better define and articulate its sub-projects, where we're going to have like the release team, the care and feeding of the release team and its playbooks and its docs and running the current release is one sub-project, but all of the engineering and infrastructure and process and tools to actually cut a release and make that process better is going to fall under a release engineering sub-project. And we had just the best discussion about what to name it, and then the origin of Bike Shed, and then how we color things in sig-release. I highly encourage you to participate in that discussion if you haven't had a chance to provide your input, because that is absolutely how we roll around here. But I think that we're looking for people to be sub-project owners for the release engineering effort. Hannes, since you're running on this, maybe I should reach out to you separately on this. But I was thinking of things like you kind of have somebody from the release team who fill in one of the sub-project owner roles, and then people who are interested in the more longer-reaching strategical follow-up-y type of stuff take on the other sorts of roles. So I have a couple people from Google who are interested in stepping up there. And I know there are a number of people from Heptio/VMware/ just SIG cluster lifecycle in general who are interested in helping out. And there was a bit of an offsite last week that maybe didn't quite allow communication to flow as freely there. So hopefully that made sense.
Yeah, I will make sure to add the to the invite, and also I know there are a lot of different people interested in packaging. I tried to get all those on board or tag them on the CAP PR and whatnot. So, yeah.
Yeah. One other question I had for you was I created an issue called cut 1.14.alpha1, and I really appreciated that you dropped some comments and stuff in there about your progress. Was that helpful for you? Was that too much friction? You want to keep doing that?
I think it was good. I want to keep on doing that.
Okay, cool. Awesome. And I think I have run through all of the release roles for the 114 release team. Any questions or comments? Okay. Do we want to spend the remainder of our time closing out the rest of the 113 retro? I'm not hearing a no. Okay.
Please, let's finish it. Please,
Okay.
please.
So,
I hear more bike shedding.
so Tim, since you are here, I would love to defer to you as like the moderator in an effort to like turn my mouth off because I want to listen more than I want to talk. I'm happy to do any further note taking. Does that sound fair?
That sounds fair to me. And I'm just looking at the list of things and I'm realizing, so formally we don't have Aish and Josh, who were half of the names on the remaining items.
And Nico is also not here.
I think that we could discuss these still. I think that there are things that were brought up and we have visibility into. The names next to them are the people who brought them up, as opposed to have these sole opinions on the topic.
That's fair.
Okay, so then let's give it a try. So the first, let me just paste this actually into, just for reference.
Yeah, I pasted a link.
You got it there, okay.
Doc in
Perfect.
the chat.
So we've got the shared doc there for folks who are following along. If you scroll down to a couple of pages, basically to the end of the document nearly, just above the action items table, you'll see a big dashed line that says content below to be discussed in next sig-release meeting. We've failed at that a couple of times, but here we are. So there's 4 bullets there. The first one, there was some question or discussion around what fixes and PRs qualify to get into master during code freeze. So priority critical urgent, what is its meaning, I think, is the basic question here. And is that a sliding bar? How do we weigh PR low risk versus high risk? And this is also something that Alexandra and I weigh, or have discovered we need to similarly weigh post-release in patch management, because we have a variety of things that get proposed there. So the formal definitions and the gating criteria are a weak area, I think, is what people have perceived. I saw this also as release lead prior to Aish. Does anybody on the call have thoughts on how we might better define those criterias? Or perhaps one of the ways about this would be, for example, Alexandra and I have been talking about trying to figure out how we do this as we go through it and writing it down. But we could also reach out to Aish for 113, or I have my experiences from 112. We could talk to Josh and Jace, for example, prior, but maybe we could formalize that. The other option between formalizing it is to say it is left to the folks' discretion, which is the way things are kind of right now, but that is fuzzy, and that I think that's why Aish brings it up. Can we remove some of that fuzziness? So thoughts from anybody?
I have some thoughts, more as a developer and contributor than a patch release manager. That for me, it seems very confusing if we accept that priority critical urgent means something different depending on the branch the PR is against, or depending on the time in the release cycle. Right now, it sounds a lot like people are using this label like, I want to merge it even though it's freeze, or even though it is to a stable branch, and that doesn't sound good.
Yeah, I would say though that label is mostly used to signal, it is used to signal attention, is not to signal whether or not it should merge necessarily. The branch manager approval, or when we're not in freeze, it doesn't really matter. It's mostly to say there's like an important bug fix and we need reviewers to look at it.
So what documents or process do we have today? If you're talking about the meaning of the label changing, where are you getting that from?
I can't speak to what Aish was seeing, but I felt like as release team lead, I actually had very little documented on that. And similarly, from the perspective of patch management, we do have the patch manager role handbook that gives some words around this, but it's actually one of the ones that goes into a lot of effort to paint a broad picture of a lot of variability and options that are open for your discretion.
Okay, I'm gonna break my thing of not talking a bunch for a second. So we just proposed to get rid of code slush as a thing. And I have pasted a link to a file that lives in K community called release.md, which Tim, you actually very helpfully wrote a good chunk of. And one of the things in there is it describes like all of the labels and stuff you're supposed to have to get your PRs to land during a certain phase. And it also talks about like the required labels and what they mean, why they mean what they mean, sort of thing. So part of me feels like maybe what you are describing is that we haven't fleshed this out enough, or maybe it's not written for the appropriate number of audiences. And another thought, just if I scroll sort of up to the top where it talks about the TLDR portion, because sorry, that's like kind of the only part I look at. There are like all these additional things that have to be added to get your PR to land during code freeze. This is a symptom / artifact of the fact that we as the release team want to be really, really sure we know what's landing why. And so we try to impose like all of this additional friction on getting a PR merged. During the code slush phase, that friction, we like gradually ramped up that, so I guess what I'm trying to say is we used to gradually ramp that friction up by introducing the code slush phase. And the code slush phase just said it's got to be, the PR has to be in the milestone. And we gate who is allowed to apply the milestone command by the milestone maintainers team, which we just purged and refreshed this year. So it should be populated by the release team members and SIG leads. The hope being that those individuals aren't going to be irresponsible and just willy-nilly add PRs in just because they think their stuff deserves to get in, but that they've actually thought through it and reasoned it out. And then code freeze added the additional, call it like social friction of adding a priority critical urgent label to your PR. So now you have to justify not just that you're like arbitrarily adding it to a milestone, but that you really think this PR is critical and urgent. So you're saying that the benefit's really high. You may not necessarily be appropriately evaluating or representing what the risk/cost of that PR is. But so that's a little bit of context on like how we got to now. I don't know that I have opinions on how to like simplify that process, though I agree it could be simplified. And somewhat related to this, because we use milestone as one of the gating features, we also kind of have an open question on what's the criteria to add something into a milestone, which is an open issue in the 114 milestone for Kubernetes sig-release. Add information about what qualifies for a milestone if anybody wants to help out with that. Thoughts?
I think you hit on one keyword a paragraph or two back. Why? Like that TLDR gives the list of things that must be applied when during the phases, but that's like you must have these things to get it to merge. But why you would choose to want to merge it in that time frame or not, and why whether a developer would make that choice to not, to defer, or why the SIG leads, reviewers, owners would choose to not apply it. And similarly, why a release team lead or patch release manager would choose not to apply it, like those gating criteria. I did notice, since you pointed it out, the section on priority label does have a couple bullets that say would. So like just as a keyword to look off of, if you see like would require patch relief if left undiscovered, or would not require patch release. That is a why rationale, but it's a pretty terse one. I don't know if there are others, but maybe that's sufficient.
Yeah, at the end of the day, I sympathize. I feel like the patch release team is the team that most feels this burden because you are of a smaller staff than the release team. The release team also feels this burden because we turn ourselves into a bottleneck during code freeze. And we have, I believe, historically seen that if you trust everybody to do the right thing, there are individuals out there who maybe have more privileges than they should, who don't all play super nicely, maybe because they haven't heard why we're doing things this way, maybe because they don't care. And so it's always that careful balance where like we really want to understand what's happening and why and have some level of control there, but we really don't want to be just a complete and utter bottleneck. So my hope and dream is better documentation here, more funneling people to this as the one page, and the refresh we have done of the people who are capable of adding the milestone might help things get better. So
anybody else have thoughts here?
I have a thought, but it's probably a totally different soapbox to stand on. So if you use GitHub search function and look for priority critical urgent, you are going to come up with about 15 different definitions for what that label means and specific use cases for it. That's where I'm leaving that.
Do you mean within a repo or across repos?
It depends. I've for the last 5 minutes been looking for like an actual definition of what that label would mean, and it's multiple different definitions depending on whether it's an issue or whether it is a PR. If it's a PR, what state is it in? So, like I said, different soapbox. Just something I want to point out because it's kind of relevant. Probably,
like there is a definition, right? There is one like GitHub has a description field for labels. So if you hover over that label, you'll see text that says what that label is supposed to mean. But what you're talking about is dictionaries don't matter. It comes down to how people use the words in conversation. And so you feel like there are different groups of people who use that particular label in different ways and aren't describing how or why they're doing that. And so tribally, they're different things.
I don't think we should bind on this label. In fact, I believe historically the merge robot actually did bind on it, and then we more or less stopped doing that because it wasn't helpful. It's a useful label for like human triage to some extent, but I don't think we can like, you know, bring down deciding whether or not something goes in or not based on like a label.
Like, I guess maybe what I was trying to allude to earlier is because we have removed that extra phase of administrivia, that maybe just using the milestone as the bot gated criteria for merging during code freeze is enough. And if we as a community are finding that actually, no, wait, things are way too chaotic, too many things are landing during code freeze, and it's making CI signal very, very unstable, then we reserve the right to like add that criteria back. I guarantee you, like when we get to the burn down phase of the release, we as humans are going to want to start ranking these things by priority to know what's critical, what's important, and what can be punted. Okay, I can take an AI to propose that we drop priority, critical, urgent from code freeze criteria, updating the docs and notifying the community. Since this is a workflow change process, I don't know if I should be seeking lazy consensus or not versus just saying this is the way we're going to do things. But this will have changed by next week, I guess, is what I'm trying to forecast timeline-wise. Back to you, Tim.
Okay, we can give that a trial, 114, see how it goes. Towards the end of the cycle, we'll understand whether it brought in undue risk or people felt it a nice simplifying change. So next on the list, how closely should handbooks be followed? Are rule books too prescriptive? This is from Nico, and he and I had actually discussed this, so I have some sense into what he was thinking. The background, I guess, is that depending on which handbook you look at, there's a very rigorous checklist of things or sort of broad generalities that inform on how you might do things. So within that, you get sort of a question as you start to step into a role, or maybe as a shadow reading the documentation. Is this prescriptive? Must I do everything that's listed here? And I think Nico phrases his question well in terms of saying how closely should handbooks be followed as opposed to must. So like Aaron's already said, hey, I didn't do a couple of these things that were on my handbook. And I think practically speaking, that's been the case every time. Each of us have approached the roles with a certain pragmatism. And I think that's good. That's normal open source community. But he wanted sort of broader clarification from the group, I think, in terms of what other people thought. Should we refine the books to be worded in a way that makes it clear that they're guidance, makes it clear which things are definitely required for consistency then from release to release and across the different preferences of the individual running things that time around? I think it's a great thing to discuss more broadly. So with that context, what do folks think?
I have an opinion on this that I tried to do with the release notes handbook recently, and it's that, there's a lot of aspects of the release notes process, which as someone who participated in it for a few releases, I'm really not psyched about, I think could be very different and or very improved. But I tried to make the handbook an explicit account of what I completed as a part of the release notes, as the release notes lead that led the release to going out successfully, and then pointed to the areas of improvement. So I personally don't think that we should have to like leads should have to follow to a letter what happened, but I do think that everything that did happen should be there so that if future leads want to change the process, they know all of the exact things that need to be accomplished for the release to go out, you know.
In that, I sort of hear the same pattern to what we've been trying to do on test grid, the concept of release blocking versus release informing. Like these handbooks, some portions of them are going to be blocking things that need done, but a lot of it is going to be informing. Others? I'm going to guess, so even if nobody speaks up, I'm going to guess for the shadows on the call, some of you are going to read the handbook or have it already at this point, and you're going to read the handbook and be like, why do we do that? Ask that question out loud. I really encourage you to, because that's one of the best things your new eyes bring to the process, the questioning. If there's not a great reason, we can't dig it up for some reason, then maybe we should not do it. That would be a great place to not do. But if there is and it wasn't clearly documented, that becomes a great PR for the shadow to make into the doc.
I'm going to break my rule again. I'll try not to rant as much this time. The TLDR rant, most of you maybe have heard me say, if you haven't, welcome to it, is that there are way too many words in these release books. That as much as I am happy that the release team has become this super amazing, all-inclusive thing, it makes me sad that there are more and more humans being tossed into the machine when really I would love to live in a world where we like just turn a crank and some gears get turned and stuff magically pops out the other side. So I love to live in a world where I take all of the really boring administrivia and I hand that over to bots or scripts or machines or programs, and they make my life a lot easier so I can do the more interesting stuff. And I oftentimes feel as though the playbooks are like a crazy amount of paranoia in written form, rather than a description of the objectives separated from how I accomplished it this time around. I kind of liked how I think Mike's statement of like, I described the state of today while I really aspire to a much better tomorrow is a problem we face in a lot of different places in the project. And I have been pretty explicit with the folks that I talk to that like, you do you. I need to be clear about my expectations about like what I need from you, but you do it how it works best for you. That said, a question that maybe I have in response is like the release lead playbook is really, really detailed on a week-by-week basis about what should happen as part of the release. It almost makes me feel like it should be not the release lead playbook, but actually like the release team description of what like the release is like. It's
definitely agree with that.
There's this weird like dry thing I have, don't repeat yourself thing I have though, where like should all of the specific milestones for each of the different tasks be called out in that one Uber schedule, or should I leave that up to each of the individual playbooks? Like how would I enforce that those things tie together? I have no great idea for that. So not really sure what I personally am signing up to do other than maybe like making my playbook smaller by spreading the responsibility around and trying to be clear when I see things as like a checkbox versus a set of steps that I need to do to check that box off. But I don't know. Yeah, I 100% agree with Tim that like, if you are new to this project or if you are a shadow, you have something that I don't have, which is fresh eyes, and that's invaluable. Use them well. They're great.
I definitely like that idea of splitting that stuff out, one into a higher level schedule, which we already have. The top level README has schedule, which in a lot of ways is redundant relative to the lead's handbook. So pushing the actual actions out into the delegates' handbooks makes a lot of sense. And the leads becoming a shorter key items checklist, that could make a lot of sense. If you fiddle around with some markdown that does that this cycle, I'd be really curious to see it. Any other thoughts from folks as they've read the handbooks for the starting the new cycle?
Well, I just wanted to add that I've noticed that the release lead handbook has a very, like Aaron was saying, is very structured format about on a week by week basis, but a lot of the other handbooks may not follow that format. Is that something that you guys endeavor to see more standardized in the future? So that it would be easier, for example, Aaron, if you wanted to like take one of your week 6 tasks and be like, oh, this should be the CI signal lead instead of the lead.
I don't have a great answer for that. I don't know. I started the handbook thing off when I was CI signal, and I realized I was doing a lot every day. And so I just needed to write it down as like a survival skill. If I didn't write it down, I knew I was going to eventually forget it. It'd be nice if they followed a common format, but I feel like it's not quite attainable. Though I'd love for somebody to dream big and like make that happen. I do like the idea of thinking of it in terms of tasks and how they could be shuffled around. But other than that, I don't think I really answered your question, and I don't think I have an answer.
Yeah, no worries. That's fine. I was just wondering about formats.
I guess like my personal opinion of the release lead schedule is to have it so broken down on a week by week basis is neat, but also kind of difficult to work with if I'm just trying to grok like what's going on. I think the way that I'm trying to model the release lifecycle in my head is to break it up in distinct phases rather than trying to boil it all the way down concretely to week by week things. Because I'm trying to imagine a far off future where the release lifecycle lasts longer than a quarter. I definitely had a couple people approach me about what if we had 3 of these every year instead of 4 of these every year? Or maybe what if we just like made it 6 months instead of 3 months or things like that. So I'm trying to think of it less in terms of weeks, but phases that are divided up into chunks. So as I break this out, I might try and reframe it that way, with the weeks as like a suggestion if you happen to be mapping this to a 12 to 13 week schedule. So I find like some of the books like CI Signal and Issue Triage definitely talk about how your duties are going to concretely change. You have like daily duties that are going to change from one phase to the next. And some of them get like extra judicious and start talking about like, you should do these extra things to prepare for the transition into burn down. And then you should do these extra things to prepare for the transition into code freeze. I don't know how much of that should be explicitly spelled out, but it's clear that like those humans needed that level of preparation to survive when they staffed that role. And far be it for me to say, I'm going to take that away just because that's a lot of text and I'm lazy. But now I'm rambling and I'm going to hand back to Tim.
All right, I'm going to move on to the next one. This has been a repeated question, although the specific form here is slightly different. The basic question has been, how do we ensure that tests get merged early in the cycle so that we can then either keep them green throughout the cycle or know that they've started out red intentionally and are intended to go green and thus become a blocker as opposed to having started as informing.
When you say tests, do you mean test cases?
Test cases.
Okay.
And I don't see Maria. Did Maria have to drop? Her name had been on this one.
Yeah, she had to drop.
Okay. Anybody have thoughts? I think one of the extra things to note here is that this could be becoming more of an issue. So that there's a lot of mentioned specifically here in this bullet of the plugin infrastructure changes or changes to APIs like cloud provider, and maybe this thing gets into the whole ecosystem distribution versus kernel type of discussion. But is this ongoing problem becoming a worse problem as we move forward?
I think we have to treat this like we do features. I mean, you can't put in a test for a feature when the feature isn't merged yet, right? But we could, attempt to require that the tests go in with the feature, or that similarly you can't add tests once we're in freeze. I don't know how well we can, enforce this though, other than the people that are approving milestone and so forth being aware of this.
For big things that are KEPs, I think we're on a path to having a better answer here.
Yeah, my hope would be that KEPs saying up front what their test plan is would address some of this. And again, I guess I want to live in a world where things that are plugins and things that are out of tree can be released on an independent cadence than Kubernetes proper. If they need to be tied to the cadence of Kubernetes proper for whatever reasons, then they probably need to have a KEP explaining why. But I don't know, I do wish Josh or Maria were here because I don't know what specific problems they bumped into that motivated this.
I'm relatively comfortable still kind of moving ahead just because we know we have a lot of eyes on this general space about this looming question, distro versus kernel. How do we truly allow things to run at their own cadences and have something still at the end of the day that's coherent and integratable together? There's a lot of discussion of that, but and people on the release team who are following that discussion.
So when you say that discussion is happening, where?
It's not happening somewhere, though. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
I'll phrase it this way, where I went around to a number of people involved in the cloud provider SIG, and not quite hands and knees, but definitely pleaded with them not to try and do any sort of refactoring or breaking up of stuff. I don't want to answer the question about how we release out of tree stuff as part of the release lifecycle. I agree it's an important question to be answered, but let's not answer it during 1.14. However, I am of the opinion that in order for that effort to go well, there should be people planning it this quarter, such that there's a plan that has been shared with the appropriate people, such that we're all on the same page and ready to go with it if 1.15 is the right time frame to move on that. But just that is not the sort of thing you want this team of people to figure out on a week-by-week basis. I would really hope to see that there's some amount of forethought being put into this. And so again, to me, that sounds like a KEP. Somebody from the cloud provider SIG pinged me, and I don't know if that draft that they had sent me has turned into a KEP yet, but that's my hope for that.
So the final issue then, I guess, moving on, this one's easy. So I guess just pause for a second. Any other comments on the sort of splitting the monolith, letting plugins go separately, keps, test plans, all that? Any other comments there? Okay, so the last one on the list, removing fixes issue number from the PR template. Josh had thrown this in and it is noted as done already. Does anybody have confirmation that that is done? I don't recall seeing it recently. Okay, we'll take it as resolved since somebody has put it in there. We can look in the revision history and see if that was Josh actually. So the action items list, I believe each of these has been getting discussion. I know the release notes one, Aaron, you have said you owe writing that up. I figured that at least on that one, you and your leads are going to be collaborating on something for a change this cycle, and that it's early for that still maybe.
Yeah, I think just general theme, the thing that concerns me is my name is on each and every one of these. I would really love, so for shadows, this is totally the place to step up and help out. And I am really okay with somebody forcefully grabbing one of these issues away from me because I can't seem to help myself and I keep signing up to write these, but I don't necessarily get around to doing all of these. And if you want to do them, that's totally fine. I will try to summarize the release notes rant since the rant spilled out of my head. But if you want, you could like watch the last retro video and transcribe it and see what happens there. And maybe that's the great place for Dave and his shadows to start from a release notes perspective. I did have a chat with Maria about she more or less does own the breaking up of the deflaking stuff, but I want to help steward it, shepherd it, whatever. I can't be the guy that writes that code, but I'm happy to help direct anybody who does want to help write code that helps deflake Kubernetes. So things of that nature. But it's a little concerning to me. What I try to do is take action items, turn them into GitHub issues, assign them to the milestone, assign them to myself. So I know that that's a thing that I said I would do. And then I go try and do it. That way I can follow up to see if I've done any improvements afterwards. If other people want to help out, I would appreciate it.
And for those that are there, obviously the linked ones are all issues in GitHub, so a place to actually engage.
Yes, but I often feel like these retrospectives are like, they're great group therapy. Don't get me wrong. I just think there's probably a lot of content here that could be distilled and turned into actionable effort if people want to do some stuff to make this better.
Yeah, I think that is the point of the retrospective. I mean, the discussion is good, but the discussion does need to lead to at least some concrete actions. Well, we're at the end of the top of the hour.
I'm just throwing. I think we do manage to get some concrete actions. We just don't manage to get all of the concrete actions, and I think that's
There's always some cans that are kicking down the road each time, but we are scraping away. But it is easy to look at the length of these documents versus the action items list and feel like there's a lot more discussion than action.
And that's totally fine. Like, I think I'm coming from the perspective of I want to celebrate successes and wins. And so what I tried to do this retro is to have us go back and yay, we did those things. It's awesome. It's just easier to do that if they're GitHub linked or used or something, rather than having to like read through paragraphs and paragraphs of text and then, oh right, I think I took care of that, but I forget how or when, or maybe it wasn't even me. It just randomly happened. And I do have a 114 retro doc started for people who want to talk about stuff. Like I already have an item in there about oops, I don't seem to know how to use calendars to schedule recurring meetings very well. Because that wasn't spelled out super clearly for me in my playbook. So anyway, thank you for moderating, Tim. Very much appreciate it. Thank you all for showing up to the 114 team meeting. Looking forward to seeing you all next week. Happy Monday.
Happy Monday.
Bye.